Dearest Constance, I received your letter and I breathed a sigh of relief that you have arrived safe and well in Australia. Those tin cans. I laughed out loud and felt vindicated for all women when I read of your episode of acquiring Buccaneer the stallion. You always did have a wonderful way of whispering to animals. I was alarmed to hear of the disappearance of your dear Uncle Lucian. Whatever danger could he be in? If I know you, dear friend, I know you will stop at nothing until you arrive at the heart of the matter, but I must caution you, Constance, to look before you leap, as you do not have any of us by your side to come to your aid immediately should you need backup. Please keep me informed of what you discover. I will inquire with Father whether he has contacts in Australia who can be of further assistance to you. You will be pleased to know that I have arranged a small package to be delivered to you. I asked our housekeeper, Mrs. Farouk, to take me to the Silk Bazaar to locate the fabric you inquired after. I also visited the tea shop you referred to and selected for you a blend of teas from different regions here in the subcontinent. I am very much into the swing of life here in Fort St. George. Those early days after I arrived were painful, to be honest, as I tiptoed around the house trying to slip back into a life I no longer belonged to. I observed as young boys unloaded produce and household items from the back of horse-drawn carts into the kitchen and around the house, according to our butler, Mr. Faraz. It's ridiculous that Mother and Father call him Mr. Sahib. That's like saying Mr. Sahib is the title for Mr. in Hindi, so we should really be calling him either Mr. Faraz or Sahib Faraz. Actually, his full name is Sahib Faraz al-Ansari. I later found out as I walked alongside him as he diligently organized daily tasks for the gardeners and the drivers and coordinated with Mrs. Farouk, whom Mother calls Mrs. Mahila. Mahila is just the Hindi way of saying lady. Her name is Mahila Leela Farouk. I remember as a child I used to refer to her as Leela, but then my mother made me refer to her as Mrs. Mahila when I got a little older. I am deliberately calling her Mrs. Farouk, which has caused a little bit of tension in the house, but my parents can't keep acting out of ignorance now that I've explained the situation to them. Old dogs can be taught new tricks, I am sure of it. After this little episode, Mother decided I should not be upsetting the staff and household affairs, and decided to take me with her to the Charity House Clinic where she volunteers when she is not working at the General Hospital. I have come to enjoy this routine of waking up early, taking breakfast with Mother and Father in the breakfast room, kissing Father goodbye as he headed towards the General's office, and riding the rickshaw with my mother to the hospital. From there it is a short walk to the clinic. I enjoy this morning walk on my own, watching the street vendors set up for the day, the children run around completing errands, and the daily hustle and bustle of Fort St. George. When I arrive at the clinic, I am always met by the respectable and extremely charming Dr. Abdu Braxton, whom the organization has hired as resident doctor and director of volunteers. Dr. Braxton and I hit it off from the very first day, and I must confess that at times we are as thick as thieves. I need only to look at the way he furrows his eyebrows or notice the clench of his jawbone to understand that the situation is dire. On other occasions, the twinkle in his eye or the way he casually leans in the doorway lets me know that he is much more relaxed and that all is well. I am intrigued by his persona, and the story of his life so far is rather exciting. Abdu was only 10 years old when the Great Mutiny of 1857 broke out, and he has shared with me horror stories that have stayed with him for the past 28 years. Needless to say, he survived that awful time, and he saw in himself a strength in handling situations under extreme pressure where most children hide away crying and fear-stricken. He knew then that he could trust himself to bring calm and order in chaotic situations, and he knew then that he wanted to be a doctor and healer of mankind to counterbalance the evils in the world. But this is only half of his story. You see, Abdu's father was a British politician who came out to India in 1845. Disenchanted with turbulent times in London, and indeed the world at large, Lord Henry A. Braxton's heart was troubled with ethical questions pertinent to the role of religion and the nature of humanity. He came to India to find himself again. He fell in love with a pretty local Muslim girl whom he married in secret and had 2 children by her, a boy and a girl. During the mutiny, Lord Braxton was injured as riots broke out everywhere, and he was forced to return to England for the extended care that the British hospital just could not provide. It was at this stage that he decided to take his son back with him and leave behind his secret bride and daughter. Furthermore, upon arriving back in England, he baptized Abdu and changed his name to John. Abdu's exotic skin color was fair enough to allow him to endure most schoolyard teasing, but he never thought of himself as John, and missed his mother, sister, and homeland immensely. He told me that every night he would look up at the stars and send a promised prayer to his mother and sister that he would see them again one day. "If light is in your heart, you will find your way home." This is a quote from Rumi, one of his favorite poets, and he is quickly becoming one of mine. He graduated from medical school in his mid-30s and took leave of his father to return to India, after 25 years of being away. Lord Braxton never returned to India to see his wife and daughter. Abdu says his father was haunted by the events that happened in India, and only recently passed away from a mixture of ill health and guilty conscience. Abdu eventually reunited with his mother and sister, and has since made peace with his estrangement from his motherland in the stories his mother and fellow friends have relayed to him. Apparently, it is very common for British subjects to have side families with local Hindu women, and when a male heir is born, he is sooner spirited away to England to be raised British, leaving mothers and daughters to be supported on a small stipend. I cannot imagine the pain and anguish a mother must feel to be separated from her son and to be treated so cruelly by her own husband. Especially now since his sister is married and lives with her husband's family. He tells me he is learning his language and religion all over again as an adult, and says that his mother's unwavering duty to God and her children gives him the strength to do what he does every day. What an excellent mother she seems. Abdu is an inspiring doctor to watch. His stitches are neat and clean. He is methodical in his checkups and tends to both the physical and holistic aspects of every patient. His bedside manner is calming and positive, and he leaves every patient with a reassuring squeeze of the hand and a genuine smile. He calls me Miss Flora. I rather like the way he says my name and how it sounds in his Anglo-Indian accent. I sometimes wonder if I could tell Abdu my secret, but then I am reminded of the warning Lady Frances instilled in us about revealing our secret to other than our kind. "You shall either be exploited or shunned, and a woman does not care for either," she would constantly say. Perhaps it is still early days for such heavy revelations on my part, although, after confiding in me his story, I feel I have found a kindred spirit who would understand me. This morning he presented the volunteers with a dish of gulab jamuns that his mother had made. He kept reiterating that it was for everyone, although we had had a conversation earlier in the week about things we had missed from home while we were in England. I had told them that I hadn't eaten a good gulab in the last 5 years, and he swore that his mother made the best in India. Later in the day, as we crossed each other in the halls, he motioned to me with his cupped forefingers and thumb towards his mouth, silently asking if I had tried the gulabs. I smiled and shook my head to say that I had, and neither did I want to eat dessert that early in the day. When the day was over and I was finally ready for my treat, I walked into the small kitchen of the office only to find that the whole plate had been demolished. I had only myself to blame, I told myself, trying hard to fight that feeling of utter disappointment in the pit of my stomach. From behind me, I turned to see that Abdu had walked in holding a smaller plate of 2 gulabs and smiling. "I saved some for you," he said shyly. As I bit into those juicy balls of heavenly sweetness, I noticed a twinkle in his eye, and I could not fail to see how handsome he stood there in the doorway. "Oh, Abdu, these are amazing," I blurted out, referring to the gulabs and strangely aware of a deep sense of fondness for him creeping over me. "It's Dr. Abdu, Flora," came my mother's stern voice as she walked into the kitchen at that very moment. At the mere presence of her, Abdu's demeanor changed, and he mumbled something about a last-minute round and was gone very fast. "Honestly, Flora, you can't just walk around pretending that everyone is your age and is your bosom friend. Dr. Braxton is almost 40 years old, male, and much too busy to stand and gossip with you in the kitchen. You will do well to remember this in the future." Mother. Thwarted once again by my mother, made to feel like a small child and micromanaged at every turn. At my ripe old age of 25, oh, how I miss the days at the academy of being treated like a lady and a grown-up. Needless to say, I have gotten good at the sight and smell of sick. As well as being an emergency care center, the clinic also sees a lot of injured child laborers, malnutritioned, homeless, and abused children. We see a range of ailments, from the manageable sunstroke, colic, fever, dysentery, to the horrors of malaria and smallpox. There is a real need here, and I have on more than one occasion expressed my wish to venture into the community where these problems arise to see what we can do to prevent the problem in the first place, rather than continually see the same problem over and over again. Father seemed to dismiss the idea as soon as I mentioned it, saying, "Goodness, Flora, you can't save the world." Mother said I was needed as an able-bodied nurse here and now, and that there is no time to waste. It was only Abdu who, eyes sparkling with enthusiasm, offered to organize a small gathering at his mother's house in the village where I could offer a series of lectures about basic sanitation and health education. Not only was this my exact intention, but I also planned to deliver more passionate lectures about human rights, equality, and the importance of women in society. I would also like to raise funds for the installation of amenities for solid waste management, clean water facilities, playgrounds for children, shelters for animals, and the list goes on. My goal is to find a way to help the locals break free from the cycle of poverty engulfing them and live a good life doing whatever they wish to do best. I hope to start in Abdu's village and from there venture one village at a time until I reach the top of India. Oh my, what a dream. This past month has really opened my eyes to the real India. That is not the India I thought I knew growing up. I was never allowed outside the garden walls to mix with society like this. Sure, we went to Father's office, the British Officers Club, and the British Gardens Country Club, where I would meet and play with other children, but I was never allowed to interact with the locals. We would, on occasion, take the horse and buggy out for a fun afternoon in the countryside and see locals going about their day, but I never really saw them, and I have come to realize that Mother and Father have always shielded me from the reality of life in the colony. I always knew there was a big world out there. It's part of the reason the walls got too small for me at the age of 19, and I was sent to the academy, and although Mother and Father say that we are more liberal than others, I cannot help but still feel stifled. No matter how much they shelter me from her, India still creeps in all her glory, the good and the bad. I feel it's my duty to inquire around to see what services the British Empire can extend to the locals. There is much good to be done here. I cannot help but see the vast difference between basic service options at the clinic, which has to acquire all from a private trust, compared to the British hospital, paid for by the coffers of the British monarchy. In my first week here, a young child was dreadfully unwell, and as he lay dying with nothing more we can do for him, I pleaded with Mother to have him transferred to the British hospital for specialist care. Mother shushed me sharply and very quickly said, "Flora, we are only a charity house. We do the best we can." I knew what she meant. This child was local and not a British subject. Such inequality. This is why I will never be a nurse and work for the British hospital, picking and choosing who to treat according to birthright and skin color. I could not look Abdu in the eye for the rest of the day for shame of this clear division. I later discovered the story of how the charity house was set up from my father. A friend of a friend felt sorry for poor locals and only agreed to set it up if Mother took charge of fund management and oversaw administration and staffing so that it was done right. Who this friend is, I do not know. I have tried snooping around the office but have found the cabinets to be locked. I must return with my all-purpose hairpin after hours to pick a few locks and find a paper trail. Who makes the decisions in this place, and how much money can I entice them to provide me if I were to fund small-scale projects in villages? I do believe I have a mission at last. I must be the championer of human rights and equality. If only I was rich. I'm excited as tomorrow I am visiting the local orphanage with Mother and Abdu to give annual vaccinations and hope to meet with the head sister there in an attempt to gain more of an insight into how they structure their charity and the services they provide for their orphans and how I can adapt these for the wider community. I must also somehow find a way to convince my parents to allow me to head into the villages without raising much conflict, as everything I suggest these days seems to end in tiresome glances on their part and utter frustration on mine. Until my next letter, I remain yours truly, Flora Rose. September 1885. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed that second chapter of the Flora Rose series. I'm so excited to bring it to you. I do have a few minutes left on this journal page, so I thought I would give you a little intro into chapter 3. I think you're going to love this one, and I'm dying to share it with you, so let's go ahead and I'll give you a sneak peek into the next chapter. Chapter 3, The Secret and the Stranger. Dear Emily, oh dearest, I have so much to tell you. I suppose it all began the day I went to visit the orphanage. It started off as ordinary a day as any. Mother and I met Abdu at the General Hospital, where we picked up our supplies of vaccinations and medical equipment and headed out to the St. George School and Orphanage on Poonamally High Road. On the way there, Mother and Abdu filled me in on how the sisters working here are always visiting and locating potential children from the Madras military male and female orphan asylums and relocating them to the orphanage. Mother has strictly forbidden me to ever visit the asylums, which only makes me want to see them more. She says that there are great horrors to be seen there of children abused and mentally insane, banging their heads against walls and scratching out their eyes. As she told me of such horrors, I looked at Abdu, who sadly nodded, confirming her stories. Perhaps I will not rush to visit the asylums after all, but must remember these children in my prayers every night. Upon arriving, we gathered our supplies and headed into the grand 2-story building. Everything inside was in wonderful order and looked very much like a well-respectable organization. We met briefly with one of the sisters in charge, who kindly escorted us to the nurse's office, where we set up our vaccination station. When she said she would be back with the first classroom, I jumped up and asked if I could be allowed to join her, as I was dying to see the students in their natural element. She nodded her approval, and as I turned, I said, "Dr. Abdu, would you like to join us?" I positioned him between my mother and I, and pleadingly implored him to say yes with my eyes. He smiled at me and turned to my mother. "Perhaps I should accompany Miss Flora, to make sure she does not disrupt the children?" he said wickedly. My mother gave a small snort and waved us away as she continued setting up, and Abdu and I were free to follow Sister Philomena to the classrooms. I was delighted to see the children's faces when we interrupted their lesson. I could not help waving at them as Sister Philomena introduced me, and some of them waved back, parroting my motions. Sister Philomena asked them all to form 2 neat lines, and I quickly dubbed my line Flora's Brigade and the other Dr. Abdu's Army. The children giggled, and I quickly set the wheels in motion, marching them to my mother. I knew that the concept of getting a needle was not a nice one for any child, and thus was hoping to bring a little bit of gaiety to the whole affair. Most of the children fared well enough, although there will always be those who are not so brave, and for those little ones, I sat them on my lap and whispered words of prayer and sang little tunes of nonsense as Abdu came at them with a needle. It was at one such time that I felt it happen, that warmth in my solar plexus, that heat in my cheeks. I was so lucky that I was wearing my short Regency lady gloves, or else everyone would have seen that my fingers were glowing. I was shocked by how quickly and how easily it came to me, but in hindsight, I shouldn't have been so shocked, as I suppose I was responding to the child's fear and interpretation that she was in mortal danger. The child went into a kind of stupor then, and did not react at all to the quick jab of the needle. Abdu seemed alerted at once, because he placed his hand on the child's temple and said, "How odd." This one has a fever, but I could have sworn that she was not hot a moment ago, and then muttered about how we should watch for unwell children before we give them vaccinations. But I knew this child did not have a fever. She was only hot because of me. I laid her on the bed and pulled the curtain around us and silently focused my energy to dissipate the heat from my body and then draw it out of hers, as we were taught by Swami Rama in our class Controlling Your Talent. When Abdu came to check on us 10 minutes later, the child was roused and giggling to the funny faces I was making and was back to normal body temperature. "How odd," he said once again, looking at me with a quizzical expression on his face. I stood up then, shrugging, offering no explanations, and returned to my mother, who still had a lineup of students and was inoculating en masse like her life depended on it. We were done in 2 hours, very weary yet satisfied that our job had been completed. On the way back from escorting the last class of children, I wondered if I could have a quick word with the head sister, so I quickly detoured towards the main office. I came to a set of solid wood doors, and as I made to knock, the door swung open, and I was surprised by the most brilliant of green eyes and locks so curly they make a girl jealous. A young man wearing a top hat and a ruffled dress shirt with long coattails was huffing out of the office and stopped dead in his tracks as he almost collided with me in the doorway. His hand went straight for his top hat, and he removed it immediately. We stood there, a moment frozen in time, as we stared at each other, his brow furrowed with frustration, his lips pursed tightly, and then he smiled, a most handsome smile. It took my breath away, and once again my solar plexus warmed. Twice in one day, no! I moved back shyly, quickly, mumbling my apologies. The head sister, Sister Marguerite, called out, "Yes, dear, can I help you?" And the young gentleman sidestepped the doorway. He gestured towards the door, put on his top hat, and started walking away down the hallway. As I regained my composure in the doorway, I took a deep breath and turned to look at the stranger, who had apparently been thinking the same thing, because our eyes met again, and he touched his hand to the brim of his top hat and tilted his head most handsomely. I turned away at once. How embarrassing to be caught looking after a man. My mother would be mortified.